And the speaker will be Rabbi Joshua Maruf. So hopefully you guys will all join us again next week. We have the privilege of having with us Rabbi David Fohrman. Just a little bit about Rabbi Fohrman. Rabbi Fohrman is the founder and CEO of the Aleph Beta Academy. He's the author of 2 books, both of which I've read and are magnificent: The Beast That Crouches at the Door and The Queen You Thought You Knew about Megillat Esther. Rabbi Fohrman also served as an adjunct professor at Johns Hopkins University and as the lead writer and editor of the Art Scroll edition of the Talmud. Rabbi Fohrman seeks to open layers of meaning of biblical texts and to help the reader develop a relationship with the text. Aleph Beta believes Torah study should be an evidence-based, intellectually stimulating, emotionally gripping, and relevant to everyday life. They're committed to spreading the greatest ideas in the Torah through engaging, exciting, illustrative videos. I don't know if you guys have heard of Aleph Beta, but just on a personal note, I get countless emails every week, Divrei Torah on the Parsha, and there's one that sticks in my mind every single week, and it's from Aleph Beta. It's sent out every Wednesday by Rabbi Fohrman, and it sticks in my mind because it's done through animation. There's animation. The interesting thing is in our family, in our house, it's become like the thing to do is Friday afternoons. All the kids get ready 1 hour before Shabbat, and they sit down in front of an iPad. All of them, my kids from age 11 to age 4, myself and my wife, and we're all so engaged and so involved in the Dvar Torah that comes every Wednesday, and we all gain so much from that. So for that, I would like to thank Rabbi Fohrman. And without any further ado, I would like to introduce to you Rabbi David Fohrman.
Okay, thank you so much for that very wonderful introduction. It's great to see you, and it's inspiring for me to be here, to be in I got a little bit of the background here on the shul. Community is not something which is the first word that springs to mind when you think of the American Jewish experience, and what you've created here, which is a community of Mashadi Jews who came from one country and transplanted yourself and have still retained that kind of connection, is just a very personally inspiring thing to see. So it's really a privilege for me to be here and be able to talk with you and get to know you. And by the way, something you mentioned about the app, if you want to watch these videos, easiest thing to do is we actually have an app, so you can just download it on your smartphone if you want to. You can do it now, you can do it later, but the app is called Aleph Beta. So it's and it's kind of hard to remember because it's not Alpha Beta and it's not Aleph Bet, it's Aleph Beta, so I get that's kind of confusing, but it's ALEPHBETA. You can find it on Android, you can find it on Apple, it's there, and you can have this stuff when you're traveling, whatever you like. So tonight I want to talk with you about, I think, a very challenging puzzle that faces us this time of year when we think about Teshuvah, we think about repentance. And the problem is this: as Jews, we are a very law-oriented religion. It all boils down to law, it all boils down to halakha. And that's all fine. But the problem is when it comes to this time of year, when it comes to Teshuvah, when we think of Teshuvah, we think of it as something which is deeply personal. It's almost like there's no experience within the Jewish religion which is more personal than repentance, than looking in yourself and trying to do better. And it's a very subjective kind of internal experience. And the question is, could there be laws for it? Everything in our religion is based on law and halakha in some kind of way. And it seems almost like a contradiction to think of law and Teshuvah in the same breath. And yet, when you read the Rambam, when you read Maimonides has right there at the beginning of his book this whole section of things called Hilchot Teshuvah, the laws of Teshuvah, which just seems insane. How could you have laws for such a personal kind of thing. I'll give you a quick example. One of the laws of tshuva is that when you say vidui, when you're confession, you're striking your chest, you're not supposed to lean. You're supposed to be standing up straight. You're supposed to bend a little bit. You're not supposed to lean. What is leaning? So there's a law for that too. Leaning is, if I'm leaning on something and it was pulled away and I would fall, that's considered leaning. So I'm not supposed to lean. There's some question. You said Shemona Esrei and said vidui and you were leaning, whether you got to do it over again. So imagine, here you are at Yom Kippur. Imagine you spent a half an hour in tefillah, you're doing vidui, tears are streaming down your cheeks, it's cathartic, you've changed everything, and it's like, and as you take your 3 steps backward, you say, oh my God, I was leaning. You know what I mean? It's like, now what? What's with that? Like, I have to do it all over again? Like, it doesn't count? It's like I'm playing tennis and the ball hit the net and it's a whole new point and the point doesn't count? Like, that's crazy. It was inside of me. Do you know what I mean? Like, how can you invalidate my feelings? How can you invalidate my thoughts? Tonight I want to talk with you about Hilchot Tshuva. It's going to be kind of a mix. I'm going to speak a little bit and show you a little bit of these videos. This is a video which our team created based upon really the Rambam in Hilchot Tshuva. And I want to begin with a question. If Judaism is such a law-oriented religion, if everything's a mitzvah, right? We know we've got 613 mitzvot. It's a lot of mitzvot. So let me ask you a question. Do you think that of the 613 mitzvot, one of them is the mitzvah to do tshuva? Okay, I want to ask you a question. Is there a mitzvah in the Torah, one of the 613 mitzvot, called doing tshuva? I'm going to ask you, we're going to take a little poll. I'm going to ask you to raise your hand. You have to vote, okay? Now, everyone has to vote. You're not allowed to abstain, so I need a yes or no vote from everybody here. Okay, you ready? So, all in favor, everybody who thinks that doing tshuva is a mitzvah in the Torah, okay? Raise your hand now. All right? Okay, good. Everybody who thinks that doing tshuva is not a mitzvah in the Torah, raise your hand now. All right, so it's about 70-30. 70% of you feel that tshuva is a mitzvah, about 30% of you feel no. Let me ask you a slightly different question. What if we said it this way? Forget Judaism for a moment. Pretend there was no religion. Pretend that God himself was consulting you. You were one of the Malachei Asharet, you were one of the angels, and God has this great idea for a new religion. It's going to be called Judaism. There's going to be 613 mitzvot. It's going to be wonderful. There's going to be this whole fire and light show at Mount Sinai. It's going to be great. And he is consulting you. He thinks that he's just filling out the mitzvah list, and he wants to know, do you think that there should be a mitzvah in the Torah called doing tshuva? Should this be one of our 613 mitzvahs? All in favor, raise your hand. Okay? All is saying, no, this should not be a mitzvah. Raise your hand. Okay, again, about 70-30. Okay. Let's look at what the Rambam says. What does the Rambam think about this? Is tshuva a mitzvah or not? I'm going to read you his words, and I want you to tell me who he agrees with. The 70% yeses or the 30% no's? You ready? Here's his language. Kol mitzvot shebetorah. All mitzvahs in the Torah. Bein aseh, bein lo taseh. Whether it's a positive mitzvah or a negative mitzvah. Im avar adam alachat, man. If somebody should transgress one of them, go against one of the mitzvah, do something wrong. So, kishayaseh tshuva v'yashuv mecheto, when they do tshuva and they repent and they return from what they've done wrong, chayav litvadot lifnei HaKal Baruch Hu. They have to say vidui. They have to confess what they've done. Vidui zeh mitzvahs aseh. This act of vidui, of confessing what you're done, is a positive commandment, and he gives you the verse. All right. Who do you think the Rambam agrees with? The 70% who said it's a mitzvah, or the 30% who said it's not? 30, right? Because if you listen to his words carefully, he didn't say there was a mitzvah to do tshuva, did he? He said when you do tshuva, there is a mitzvah, but it's not tshuva. What's the mitzvah? The mitzvah is vidui. The mitzvah is not tshuva. Very strange. The Rambam says all of tshuva is not a mitzvah. There's one component of tshuva that's a mitzvah. That component is vidui. And we know that tshuva actually has more than one component. But the Rambam singles one out and says that's the mitzvah, which is really mind-boggling. There is a problem that confronts us all, I think, on Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is one of these days, Rosh Hashanah too. You spend a long time in shul, in Beit HaKnesset. And, it's hours, and it's hard to focus. Imagine that you said to yourself, I have ADD, I have a very hard time focusing. I've got like maybe 5 minutes of focus time. Like, what should I focus on? If I could only focus on 5 minutes of the Yom Kippur prayers, what would be the really important stuff? Should it be Natan Tokef? Like, what should I focus on? You know what the Rambam would probably tell you? The Rambam would probably say, the 5 minutes, probably vidui. That's the mitzvah. It all boils down to that. It's really only 4 words in the entire Yom Kippur service of Alanachnu Chatanu L'Fanachnu. That's really it. Why? Why is vidui so important? Let me ask the 30 percenters. 30 percenters, can you raise your hand again? Okay, can I have a volunteer from one of you 30 percenters? Why you voted no? Why do you think that tshuva should not be a mitzvah in the Torah? Does someone want to explain to me what their rationale was? Anybody? Yeah?
In order to do the tshuva, you have to do a sin.
Good, so keep on going.
So it encourages you to do a sin.
Okay, all right, good. How come? That makes perfect sense. It sounds funny, but you're absolutely right. Tell me your name.
Michael, opinion.
Right? What Michael's point is that in order to do tshuva, you actually have to do a sin first. So there can't be a mitzvah to do tshuva because that would be like a mitzvah to sin. You know what I mean? Like, it just doesn't work. In other words, here's another way to explain it. Let's say you're a candidate for tshuva. If you're a candidate for tshuva, it means you've been doing stuff wrong. It means you haven't been listening to God. That's what it means, right? So what's God going to do? God's going to say, hello, I'd like you to listen to me now and do tshuva. If I was listening to you, I wouldn't have done anything wrong in the first place. Like, I'm keeping on doing the thing wrong. I'm not listening. So now I'm going to come and say, listen to me and change? I already said, listen to me and don't do it in the first place. So you can't come to someone and say, do tshuva. If they're already in a position where you're going to come and say, do tshuva, they're not listening to you. They're not going to listen to you anymore if you say, stop doing this and change. So it doesn't make sense for there to be a mitzvah to do tshuva. Tshuva is just something you have to decide you want to do. It's your personal choice. There can't be a mitzvah. Give me for 1 second, if you make that choice though, what the Rambam seems to be telling you is if you choose to do tshuva, there's a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it. Is there a right way to do tshuva? The Rambam seems to say yes. Make sure to include vidui. Vidui is very important. If you're going to try to change, do it this way. Why is vidui so important? That's what I want to leave you with tonight. That's the central question. So we don't have a lot of time, so let me take you into the first of these videos. I'm going to show you 3 10-minute videos tonight, or parts of them at least. Let me show you the first one, and maybe we'll stop in the middle and kind of discuss it.
Okay, so what are these 4 elements of tshuva according to the Rambam? How is it that he defines them? Let's take a quick look. And as we do, I want you to play a little game with me. This is a game. One of them doesn't fit together. So we're going to play this game, and you need to figure out which one of these things doesn't fit, and you got to define why it is that it doesn't fit with the other 3. Here are the 4 things. And I'm reading now from the second paragraph of the first chapter of the Rambam Selihot Tshuva. Mahiya tshuva, so what is tshuva? The Rambam says it has the following elements in it. On the one hand, it requires that the one who transgressed has to leave behind the wrongdoing. Can't be doing the wrong thing anymore. And as part of that, I'm going to suggest, Yasirium Machshavto, he has to get rid of it in his mind. It's not just that he has to stop doing it, but he can't be continually preoccupied about doing it. He has to accept in his heart that he's not going to do it again. He has to make a commitment to the future that he's not going to be doing this thing. And he also needs to regret that which he's done in the past. So here's the fourth element. So he needs to confess out loud what it is that he's done to whomever it is that he's offended. Okay, so these are the four elements of tshuva. Azivat ha'chet, leaving behind the wrongdoing. Kabbalah latid, deciding you're not going to do it again. Yitnachem al sha'avar, regret. And finally, vidui, articulating what you've done out loud and confessing it to the one you've offended. Okay, so take a moment and ask yourself, which one of these four things seems fundamentally different than the other three?
Okay, guys, what do you say? We're playing our little game at Sesame Street. You've all seen the show. Which one of these, just forget halacha for a moment, you're just looking at these three things. Which one doesn't seem to fit? Which one seems different than the others?
Regret.
Vidui, right? All in favor of vidui, raise your hand. I think it's vidui. At least the men think it's vidui. I'm not sure about the women. I think it's vidui too. So anybody care to tell me what makes vidui different than the others? Forget the fact that the Rambam says it's a mitzvah. How is vidui different than the others? Anybody?
All the three included in the
All the three are included in the vidui. Not really, right? Because, well, they relate to vidui, but let's try and articulate a little bit more, yes?
All three has something to do with you and yourself.
Okay, good. So tell me your name? Tracy. Okay, so Tracy says, if you actually think about it, the other three are all stuff you can do on your own. They're what we might call intrapersonal, right? It's inside you. I don't need anybody else. If I want to stop doing something wrong, that's just between me and me. If I want to regret about it, that's between me and me. If I decide not to do it again, it's me and me. Vidui requires two to tango. You have to have someone else. It's it's interpersonal. I need to do this with someone else. So it's interesting. The only element, which is a mitzvah, is actually the interpersonal element of tshuva, which is very interesting. Let's go a little farther here.
Okay, so if you said that vidui is the one that didn't fit, then I am totally on your side. It's different because vidui is actually the only interpersonal element in this whole list. Everything else can be done by you yourself sitting in a dark room. The only thing that actually involves someone else is confession, is acknowledging what you've done to the one you did it to. You can't do that yourself in a dark room. You actually could if the only one that you've offended is God. If you didn't eat kosher, then you can confess in a dark room, but you're still not just confessing alone. You're saying it out loud to him. If, on the other hand, you're confessing to a person that you've actually sinned to, then you gotta talk to that person. It is by its nature interpersonal. So we will come back to vidui and analyze it a little bit more. But for the time being, it's kind of interesting that this one element of the four that doesn't seem to fit happens to actually be the only element of tshuva that the Rambam defines as one of the 613 mitzvah. In order to understand that, we need to take a little bit of a deeper look at the other three. I want to ask you another question here now. What's the common thread in these ideas? So let's go through these ideas again. Azivas ha'chet, stopping to do the thing that's wrong. Kabbalah latid, accepting not to do it again. Charata, regret for having done it. Okay, an easy way perhaps of getting at what is the commonality in these three things might be to take a quick look at what the difference between each one of these three things are. But what I want to say...
Let me just stop you right here. What do you say about this? These are the other three elements of tshuva, leaving vidui aside. So if you look at these three elements up on the board, so imagine, right, raise your hand if you took the SATs. You take the SATs? All right. So remember on the SATs, back when I was taking SATs, I don't know if they still have this, so there would be this question, what's the best title of this paragraph? Do you guys have those? All right. So imagine you were playing what's the best title of the paragraph with this stuff. And you had to come up with a title that didn't use the word tshuva, right? And you had to say, okay, there's Azivat Achet, leaving behind the sin. There's Kabbalah Asid, deciding not to do it again. There's Charata, right, not doing it in the past. Regret. Now, what's the best title for that? What would you say the best title for that is? Can you come up with a title that does not use the word tshuva? What would you say this stuff is? Like, what is this other stuff in tshuva? What's it all about? Is this one thing? That's a very interesting possibility. Your name again? Emiel. So Emiel says, there's really one word, and I think I would agree. The word is change. How do you change? So I'd say, well, I know how I change. I just stop doing it. I'm doing one thing and I stop and I change, then now I've changed. No, the Rambam says that's actually not how you do it. There's actually three different elements of change. So now that we've talked about what's similar, change, what's different about each of these three? If it's all about change, how are each of the three different than each other? Time. Isn't this interesting? The only thing is that if you take change, you could almost express it algebraically, right? Change is like x. And then x times time will equal each one of these different things. In other words, stopping to do the thing that's wrong, that I do in the present. What about committing not to do it again? That relates to the future. What about regretting what I've done? That relates to the past. Do you understand? It's really change in past, present, and future. Let's talk about that.
Just use it, they're kind of different in terms of time. Think about the time frame associated with each of them. When I think about, for example, stopping to do the thing that's wrong, does that take place in the past? Does it take place in the present? Or does it take place in the future? When do you stop doing something wrong? Well, that's in the present. You have to stop doing it now. What about Kabbalah Lati? Accepting not to do it again. That, of course, relates to the future. I'm not going to do it again in the future. And what about Charata? Well, regret, of course, that has to do with the past. I regret what I did in the past. Isn't it kind of interesting that these three elements relate to three time frames, past, present, and future, which leads to the very intriguing idea that maybe they're actually the same thing. The only thing that divides them is time frame. Maybe Azikat Achid, Kabbalah La'atid, and Charat are all actually the same thing. If we talk about a title for the paragraph, it's very easy to come up with a title. It's just this one idea. The only difference between these three things is what time frame you're doing it in. When you do it in the past, we call it regret. When you do it in the present, we call it leaving the sin behind. When you do it in the future, we call it accepting not to do it again. And now the great question is, what is this thing that's common to all of them? Let X be the idea that's common to all of these once you strip away time. What is X? What I want to suggest is the best title for this paragraph might actually be one of these elements itself, which is Azivat Achet, leaving behind a wrongdoing. It's almost like what it means to distance oneself from a wrong that one has committed means distancing oneself in the present, distancing oneself in the future, and distancing oneself in the past. When I distance myself in the present, we call it leaving behind the sin, no longer doing the thing that's wrong. When I distance myself in the future, we call it accepting not to do it again. And when I distance myself in the past, we call it regret. And now, why do I need to be so fancy? Why do I have to have all these elements of past, present, and future? It's a very good question. I'm going to theorize here. We live in all three of these worlds simultaneously. You may not think that's true. You may think, well, I live in the present now. I take one day at a time. When the future comes, that's the future. When the past comes, that was the past. And I just live in the present. But I think the notion we live in the present is, in fact, a kind of illusion. Even now in the present, we also kind of live in the future. We anticipate the future. And we reflect upon the past. And that affects our present, too. Think about life for a moment. Without these elements, without memory, without anticipation of the future, locked in this eternal present, it doesn't even feel like you're being human. It's part of what it means to live in the present, to live with memory, to live with anticipation of the future. Maybe then, if that's what it means to be human, to live in all three of these states, then to really leave behind a wrong also has to relate to all these different kind of states.
And let me try to make this clear with an analogy for a minute. What I'm saying here is that we all think that we live in the present. I remember when I was growing up, my mom used to have this song playing in the house, I live one day at a time. You know, yesterday's dead, and tomorrow is blind. I live one day at a time. I don't know about tomorrow. I don't know about yesterday. I live one day at a time. But the truth is not that way. We don't live one day at a time. Part of what makes you human is, for a minute, what I'm saying here is that we all think that we live in the present. I remember when I was growing up, my mom used to have this song playing in the house, I live one day at a time. You know, yesterday's dead, and tomorrow is blind. I live one day at a time. I don't know about tomorrow. I don't know about yesterday. I live one day at a time. But the truth is not that way. We don't live one day at a time. Part of what makes you human is your ability in the present to have your present enriched by both the past and the future. Your memories. You ever had the experience of having a phone that you never really backed up? You had like 3,200 photos on it for the last 5 years, and then water gets on it and the photos are like gone, and you're thinking, what am I going to do? Right? You feel like something's been stripped away from you. Your memories that you carry around with you enrich your present. Your ability to anticipate the future enriches your present. So therefore, if you're going to change as a human being, you have to just not change now. You have to change that way. You have to change and bring the past and the future along with you. Let me give you, again, an analogy. So I'm a rabbi. So let me give you an extreme analogy. Let's take our cheeseburger analogy. So imagine I have this secret sin, right? Imagine I love cheeseburgers. Nobody really knows, but I'm really into cheeseburgers. When's the best time to eat cheeseburgers? Right before I kneel on Yom Kippur, right? So imagine, like, I'm the kind of guy, usually you can't find me in shul around Eli. I'm at McDonald's. Nobody really knows. I'm eating my cheeseburgers. It's terrible. I feel very guilty about it. And I decided I want to change. So 1 year, right, what's the first thing I have to do? If this year I'm going to change, this year, when I go to shul, I got to be there for Nila, you know what I mean? I can't be at McDonald's eating my cheeseburgers. So imagine I'm in shul during the Ela. My friend Bob, who kind of knows about the cheeseburger thing, my friend Bob comes over to me and says, Rabbi, you're in shul for Nila. It's like I never see you here around this time. What's going on? I say, yeah, you know, I'm turning over a new leaf. This year I can do it without the cheeseburgers. I feel terrible. You know, and I'm not doing cheeseburgers this year. So now that's great. But imagine Bob comes to me and says, Rabbi, what about last year's cheeseburgers? And what if I say, last year's cheeseburgers? Oh, those were so great. Those are the best cheeseburgers I ever tasted. As a matter of fact, just thinking about last year's cheeseburgers is powering me through Neila this year. You know, just the memories of last year's cheeseburgers. So you would say I'm still kind of connected to the cheeseburgers. You know what I mean? I'm not connected now, but I'm connected now through the past. The memories are connecting me. So I have to really say, look, if I had to do it over again, I feel terrible about the cheeseburgers. I would have rather if I could have done it without the cheeseburgers. So if I do that, I've regretted the cheeseburgers. But let's say Bob comes to me and says, Rabbi, so what about next year? What if I say, hey, let's take 1 year at a time? Like next year's another year. As a matter of fact, just thinking about the possibility of next year's cheeseburgers, that's what's powering me through Neila this year. You'd still say, I'm still connected, you know what I mean? So to really disconnect, I've got to disconnect now for the past, and now for the future. And these really are the three elements of tshuva. Okay, so those are the three. And now that brings us back to vidui.
When you do all those three things, you've actually cut your ties to the wrong. I'm no longer connected to it now because I'm not doing it. I'm not connected to it in the past because I regret it. And I'm not connected to it in the future either because I committed not to do it. When you do these three things, then as a human being who lives in a present enriched by memories of the past and anticipation of the future, you've left behind the wrong. Okay, so now I have a challenge that I want you to think about. So much for the three elements of tshuva that are really one, leaving behind a wrong. What more could you ask of me? But the Rambam says I haven't even gotten started yet. Vidui, articulating what you've done, confessing it to the one that you've offended, that is the mitzvah of tshuva. What does the Rambam mean? I'm such a good guy, I've left behind the sin. According to the Rambam, I haven't really done anything. Why? What is it that vidui adds to the mix that's not already there? Why is it so crucial? We're going to talk about that when we come back in the next video.
Okay, so those are our first of our 10-minute videos. And what we really need to do now is say, look, you know, if I've done all that, I'm such a tzaddik. But the amazing thing is, as I've just said, is that the Rambam says you actually haven't even gotten started yet. All that does, those three, it's put you in a position to do the mitzvah. There's no mitzvah yet. All of that is just stuff which you can either decide to do or decide not to do. What is the mitzvah? The mitzvah is really a vidui. So let's take a look at this.
Okay, so let's look at the vidui element. What exactly does vidui add? We mentioned before that vidui is the only interpersonal element in this mix. I want to expand on that. The Rambam makes a very interesting analogy that I want to call to your attention. Here's what he says, and I'm quoting now from chapter 2 in the Rambam, paragraph 3. Kol mitvada b'dvarim. Imagine, he says, that someone would confess what he's done to the victim that he's offended, v'lo gomer b'libo la'azov, but he didn't accept to stop doing the thing that's wrong. He hasn't let go of the sin. Harei zedam, what is this comparable to? L'tovo v'sheretz biyado, it's like going into a mikvah and holding on to an insect that continues to make you impure. A mikvah would purify you. This dead insect, touching it, is the thing that makes you tummy, that makes you impure. That the going to the mikvah doesn't do anything. So that's his analogy. Now if you think about that analogy, it's a fascinating analogy because it has so much to teach you about the meaning of vidui and its connection to the other three elements of tshuva. So let's take apart the analogy. What is analogous to holding on to the insect?
Let me ask you that. Listen to this analogy, you tell me, what's the insect? The Rambam says that if you say you're sorry to somebody, you confess, but you haven't let go of the sin, it's like going into a mikvah while continuing to hold on to this insect that makes you tummy. What is the insect in the analogy? Sin. It's the wrongdoing. Letting go of it, right, is what? Letting go of it are those three elements, which means that going into the mikveh in the analogy is what? It's vidui. A fascinating analogy. What does this mean?
Holding on to the wrongdoing. Not committing yourself to abandon it in the future. So if I don't commit myself to abandon the crimes, I'm still holding on to the crime. I'm holding on to the thing that makes me tummy, to the thing that makes me impure. Let's say I would let go of the crime. Let's say I would let go of an insect. In the laws of Tuma and Tara, and the laws of purity and impurity, if I let go of an insect that makes me tameh, do I become tahor? Do I become pure? The answer is no. For that, you have to immerse yourself in the mikvah. When you go into this mikveh and you're completely surrounded by the water and you've let go of the insect, then you become pure. But when that happens, the purity that you experience is not a result of letting go of the insect. That just sets up a situation where you can go in the mikveh. The transformation happens in the mikveh. What is going into the mikveh analogous to? According to the Rambam, vidui, the act of confessing your sin, expressing what it is that you've done to the victim of your crime, that is analogous to going into a mikveh. How do we make sense of this analogy? What is the Rambam telling us? Let's take a step back and put it all together. Why are the first three elements of tshuva not enough? I think it goes back to the question of these elements not being interpersonal. The Rambam seems to argue that what vidui adds is something transformative, something that actually repairs the relationship that was damaged. Every wrong damages a relationship, either a relationship between someone and God or a relationship between someone and other people, or both. Something is hurt, some relationship is hurt with every wrong committed. What the Rambam is telling us when he says that if you decide to do tshuva, there's a right way to do tshuva and a wrong way to do tshuva, is that the right way to do tshuva involves doing something interpersonal. It involves rehabilitating the relationship that was damaged, getting the relationship between you and the one who you hurt rehabilitated again. That's the mitzvah. The mitzvah is repair the damage. You see, the other three elements of tshuva are not about repairing the damage in your relationship with others. They're about just making you a better person. If I leave behind a sin, in past, present, and future, I no longer do it. I regret having done it. I'm not going to do it again. That's self-improvement. You want to make yourself a better person? Go make yourself a better person. But if you decide that you want to do tshuva, there is a mitzvah. The mitzvah is repair the relationship you damaged. Fix what it is that you broke through vidui. Vidui doesn't work unless you do the other three things. It's like going into a mikveh while you hold on to the insect. You have to let go of the wrong. You have to let go of the insect before you have a chance at transforming a relationship. But after you've done that, after you've set yourself up to be able to rehabilitate your relationship, then go all the way and do it. Repair the relationship you damaged. How do you repair it? You repair it through vidui. How does vidui work? In what sense is it like a mikveh? For the answer to that question, we need to go to the Hebrew root of the word. Vidui means to confess what it is you've done to a victim, to apologize essentially to the victim, but it comes from a particular Hebrew root, the letters Yud, Daled, and Hey. What other words come from that root? There's actually a very famous phrase that you all know, probably, that comes from that root. Todah, as in Todah Rabbah, thank you. It turns out that the Hebrew word for thank you and the Hebrew word for I'm sorry are actually the same words. They come from the same root. They're both acts of what we might call hoda'ah. So here's the great question. If there's one Hebrew phrase, hoda'ah, from the root Yud Daled Hey, that has two meanings in English, I'm sorry on the one hand, confession, and on the other hand, thank you. You got to ask yourself why. Why does one Hebrew phrase have two English translations? It must be that those two words aren't actually two different things. There must be an essential commonality between saying you're sorry and saying thank you. They're really the same thing. They're both acts of hodah. If we can understand the core of hodah, maybe we can get at the magic of vidui. Let's come back and talk about that.
Okay, so let me ask you guys this question. This puzzle, and this will bring us to our very last video here, which is, why do you think there's one Hebrew word for these two English ideas? It must be that from the standpoint of the Hebrew language, these two ideas, thank you and I'm sorry, are in fact the same idea. How could thank you and I'm sorry be the same thing? Anyone want to take a stab at that? Thank you and I'm sorry. What's the commonality? Yeah?
It's a sense of acknowledgement.
Okay, a sense of acknowledgement, but a certain kind of acknowledgement, right? If I acknowledge that this bima is a bima, so that's very nice, it's an acknowledgement, but that's not an act of vidui or an act of saying thank you. So saying thank you and I'm sorry is a certain kind of acknowledgement. What kind of acknowledgement?
Relationship improvement.
Okay, an acknowledgement in a relationship between people, but not all acknowledgements in a relationship between people also are thank you and I'm sorry. So if I acknowledge that that's a beautiful tie, right, so that's not an act of thank you or I'm sorry. Go ahead.
You need to humble yourself to thank someone, and you need to humble yourself to apologize.
Okay, interestingly, both of them involve a sense of humility, right? If you think about it, it's, yes, both of them involve a sense of humility. Let's get to the words. How do you say thank you without using the word thank you? How else could you say thank you without using the word thank you? Somebody's done you a great favor. What can you say? I appreciate it. What does the word appreciate mean? Value. I value, I understand the value of what you've done. When I say I'm sorry, I understand, in other words, when I say thank you, I understand the positive value in what you've done for me. When I say I'm sorry, I understand the negative value of what I did to you. It's actually the same kind of thing. Yeah?
I was going to say the commonality is also like a sense of respect in a relationship. So you're, like you said, valuing. It's more something between the relationship. So I'm sorry.
Okay, and if you think about the relationship value of these two things, what does I'm sorry and thank you do within a relationship? They actually do the same thing within a relationship, which is what?
Improve. Improve it.
Anybody? What?
Improve it.
They improve it. How do they improve it? What do they do? What's the improvement? So relationships, again, and this is where, well, we'll come into here, there's a problem. Relationships are great. There's one problem that makes relationships very, very uncomfortable. That problem is imbalance. Relationships can get imbalanced in various different ways. And by the way, this is very powerful. So imagine you go into the store and you want to buy a car, right? So you're looking at the nice showroom and then a salesman sees you. The salesman says, do you need any help? You say, no, I'm just really browsing. He says, no, come into my office. Here, pulls out his private fridge. Can I offer you a Coke? Stop. Don't take the Coke. Why? Because you take the Coke, what happens? See, your relationship is balanced right now. You don't know him, he doesn't know you. The minute you take that Coke, what happens? You owe him. You understand? He has done you a favor. What do you want to do now?
Owe him back.
I want to reciprocate. You only have one way to reciprocate. What's your only way to reciprocate? Buy the car. Do you understand what's going to happen here? He gave you a 25-cent Coke. You're going to buy a $25,000 car. This is what's going to happen here because of this dynamic. It's very, very powerful, the urge to reciprocate. But the problem is the urge to reciprocate can bring you to really bad places too. What happens if I do something kind of negative to you? The urge to reciprocate, what do we call it? Revenge. This is where Hodah comes in. So let's take a look at this last video.
Okay, so we have this riddle. There seems to be this connection point between these two concepts. Thanks on the one hand, apologies on the other hand. How are these two things one concept? One way that you can get at the essence of the concept is to try talking about the concept without using the word. So I might say to you, well, how do you say thank you without actually saying thank you? We might also try the flip side of this, which would be, how do you say I'm sorry without actually using those words, I'm sorry or I apologize? And I think the word that comes to most of our minds is I appreciate what you've done. The word appreciate has different meanings if you look it up in the dictionary, but they all revolve around the concept of value. To appreciate something is to recognize the value of it. At its core, saying thanks is an act of recognition. It is to recognize the value of what it is that someone did for you. It's essentially an act of acknowledgement. I'm sorry is also an act of acknowledgement. It's a recognition of what I did to hurt you. Both thanks and apology are a kind of recognition, but not just any old kind of recognition. Recognition of a kind of imbalance that has come into a relationship. You can view any relationship as a kind of balance. If I don't know you and you don't know me, we start a relationship together, so our relationship is in balance, and relationships crave balance. Everyone hates it when they're in imbalanced relationships. They can get unbalanced even in nice ways, and of course they can get unbalanced in not nice ways too. Let's talk about nice ways a relationship can get unbalanced. You do me a favor. I move in next door, and you come over and you bring me food, and you help my kids with their homework, and you introduce them to the other people on the block. How do I feel? I am so happy. You have given me this wonderful gift. So right now our relationship is sort of out of balance. You're up there, you gave me this gift, and I feel like I'm down here, and what do I want to do? I want to reciprocate. I want to give something back to you, because that's going to restore balance in our relationship. And there's nasty ways for our relationships to get unbalanced. What if I do something terrible to you that has lasting ramifications on your life? I hurt you, I damage your reputation. How do you feel? You're angry. There's a desire for revenge. What is revenge? It's tit for tat. And that's why revenge is sweet, because I have balance again. So the question is there another way to bring balance back into relationships without reciprocating? What if you can't reciprocate? What if you've done this incredible favor for me, you've saved my life, and I have no way to really reciprocate that? What do you do then? How can two sides bring back balance to the relationship without reciprocation? And this is where the magic of Hoda'ah comes in. The act of Hoda'ah is the way you can bring balance back into a relationship without reciprocating. And how do you do it? You do it through recognition. When I look you in the eye, and I say thank you, what does thank you mean? Let's get to the other word for thank you. I say, I appreciate what you've done. I recognize what you've done. It's paradoxical. It's crazy. It doesn't even seem like it would make sense. You're actually looking the imbalance in the eye and recognizing it in the presence of the other person. And that somehow makes the imbalance go away when the other person accepts that recognition. So if I say thank you, and you say you're welcome, we can go on again in our relationship. We're back in balance. It's crazy. This shouldn't even work. How can you make an imbalance go away? Because you've recognized it. But that's how human relationships work. Which, by the way, is why it's so hard to apologize. Because here you are worried. You're thinking the only way I can possibly make this relationship better is to sweep the problem under the rug, to not talk about it. Then maybe the imbalance will go away. But that's not how you get dissonance to go away. You get it to go away by showing that you understand. If I can say, I did this, I feel terrible about this, and I understand what it is that I've done. I am sorry because I understand. That kind of recognition heals a relationship. And that is the soul of Vidui. Vidui heals our relationships. These relationships can't get out of balance. What are you going to do? Say you're never going to accept a favor from somebody because you can't accept the imbalance? Or that the only way you're going to bring back balance is by taking revenge? You'll destroy everything. Hoda'ah is required because it's the only way to make it work over the long term. Rabbi Abraham Tversky used to say that the only 3 words that you really need to know in marriage are these: thank you, I'm sorry, and I admire you. And these are actually the 3 faces of Hodah. In Hebrew, you use the word Hodah for all 3 of these things. They're ways of coming to grips with imbalance, looking the other in the eye, and saying, I understand, and being able to go on. Going back to the Rambam, isn't it interesting that there are 4 elements of tshuva, but only one of them is the mitzvah? The mitzvah part of tshuva is vidui. Stand back and ask yourself, what are the implications of that? Well, let's start with the other 3 parts of tshuva, aside from vidui. As we said before, they're really about one thing: leaving behind a sin. But leaving behind a sin is something that I do intrapersonally. It's something I do myself at home in my own mind. That just sets up the mitzvah. The mitzvah is intrapersonal. It's something I can only do with you. The mitzvah is bring balance back into the relationship. Every sin damages a relationship. Either it damages your relationship with God, it damages your relationship with someone else, or it damages both relationships. Wrongdoing hurts. Only you can decide if you want to change your mind. There is no mitzvah to change. But if you're going to change, if you're going to turn your life around, there's a mitzvah to change the right way. Truth is not just self-improvement. It's about repairing your relationships with those who count. It's about healing the harm that you've caused. You do that through vidui. And vidui, by the way, is not an easy thing to do. The words are a very simple sentence, a sentence that has a subject, a verb, and an object. I have wronged you. But if you compromise any one of those words, either the subject or the verb or the object, it doesn't really work. Vidui might be magic and might be like going into a mikvah, but there's very little partial credit. If you come and try to apologize to somebody and you don't really recognize your culpability, you don't recognize the I. Yeah, I recognize that a wrong was committed to you, but I don't really see that I had another choice. That's not really an active recognition. It doesn't work to rebalance the relationship. If I compromise the verb, I understand that I did something, but what I did was a mistake. I'm sorry for the mistakes I've made. It's not about a mistake. A wrong implies real responsibility. I've wronged you. There's a subject, there's a verb, and there's an object. If you ever want to keep it straight, just think back on the political apology. Mistakes have been made in my administration. No subject, no verb, no object. Who made the mistakes? I don't know. There was no I, there's no we. They were made. We don't know who made them. And what happened? What's the verb? There wasn't a wrong that was done. There was no sin. There were mistakes. Mistakes were made. And who did they affect? We don't know who they affected. Mistakes were made. Maybe they affected somebody. Maybe they didn't. There's no subject. There's no verb. There's no object. There's no nothing. It's so easy to pretend you're apologizing without apologizing. It's so hard to really recognize. But when you do, you can go into the mikveh. You can come out being able to move on again with the other person, with God. You can't say you're sorry unless you've left behind the sin, unless you're not doing it anymore, unless you're not anticipating, unless you're not reveling in what it is that you've done. You have to leave it behind, but leaving it behind doesn't heal a relationship. Only vidui, only acknowledgement heals a relationship. But you can't acknowledge unless you've let go of what it is that you've done. You put those things together, and then you have real, meaningful change. Change that doesn't just make me a better person, but heals our relationships and lends them vibrancy and richness. Lets us go on and grow together. That heals a relationship that you can't acknowledge unless you've let go of what it is that you've done. You put those things together, and then you have real, meaningful change. Change that doesn't just make me a better person, but heals our relationships and lends them vibrancy and richness. Lets us go on and grow together. We talked in our first video about the apparent oxymoron of Hilchot Tshuva. It seems so self-contradictory. Law is objective. Tshuva is so subjective, so personal. Tshuva is not just self-help. It's repairing a relationship. And when I try to repair a relationship with you, there's a right way to do this. And all of the laws of Tshuva conspire to help you do it the right way. You can't lean when you say vidui. Why? You have to say vidui out loud. Why do you have to say it out loud? Maybe to another person, but to God. Can't God understand your thoughts? Vidui needs to be said out loud because that's the way you relate to someone. Vidui is an exchange. I'm apologizing to you. An exchange means that the words have to come out of me and go to you. Thoughts aren't enough. If somebody wrongs you, it's not enough to just look at their face and kind of see that they look regretful. If they look you in the eye and say they're sorry, they've given you something. They've given you words. And when you accept those words, the relationship between you can be rebalanced, can be healed. And so the same is true even with God. To rebalance our relationship with God, we have to give him words too. And of course, whenever you say something, it's not just what you say, it's your body language too. Most of our communication really comes in nonverbal form, in body language. When a kid apologizes to a parent for throwing a baseball through the window and is slouching when they do so, what does his body language say? The parents can look at the kid and say, stand up straight and tell me you're sorry. What do you mean stand up straight? When I stand up straight, I take responsibility for what I've done. That's vidui. I did this. That's the I. When you lean, your body language says it wasn't really me entirely. It was this other thing too. You can't do vidui when your words say one thing and your body language says something else. So the bottom line is this. The Rambam is actually giving us a roadmap here. He's helping us understand what tshuva is and how it works. And vidui, done right, is right at the center of that map. The words that we call vidui have the power to change everything. And therein lies the mitzvah that's the kernel of it all. Hi, this is Rabbi.
So I'll leave you with that, with one final thought here as we go into Selihot, which is, again, if Yom Kippur seems overwhelming, and it does seem overwhelming, there really is one mitzvah at the core of it all. If you decide to do tshuva, the mitzvah is to include vidui. And vidui is really just 4 words. You know, I've wronged you. Very simple words, but very hard to say. And if you can focus on that, it can give you a way of centering yourself on Yom Kippur and before Yom Kippur. I remember back in yeshiva, we used to have a custom, maybe you have it here too, that you would go to your friends before Yom Kippur and you try to make amends. But the Yetzer Hara to get out of vidui is very, very strong. And you can trick yourself very easily into thinking that you've apologized when you really haven't. So in yeshiva, we used to have this custom. You'd go up to your friends, and you'd ask them to be mofel you, right? You know what I'm talking about, right? What's wrong with this? What's wrong with this picture? So I walk up to my friend Bob, who I really kind of stabbed in the back over this past year, and say, Bob, you know, I want you to forgive me, right? What did I just do? Have I apologized? No, I didn't. Have I acknowledged that I've done anything wrong? No. So I come up to Bob and I say, Bob, I need you to do something. I need you to forgive me. Do you know what I just done? I just sneakily turned the tables on him, right? Because before I said this, whose responsibility was it to do something over here? It was mine. I needed to apologize. But now I'm not apologizing. I'm saying, Bob, I need you to do something. And let's say Bob doesn't feel like forgiving me so much. But I say, Bob, will you forgive me for anything I might have done this past year? Right? So now Bob feels like a jerk if Bob doesn't say, oh yeah, sure, like whatever. Do you understand what I've done? Like this is awful, this is evil. Right? So do not go around this year and ask people to mofel you. Just don't do it. It's just a bad, corrupt thing to do. Right? Instead, focus on what the mitzvah actually is. If there's someone that you've truly offended, right, or that you think you might have offended, try and come up with the courage to say, look, I think I might have offended you this year. I'm really sorry if I've hurt you, right? And if you begin with that, later, a week later, a couple days later, you say, you think you might be able to forgive me. At least that's honest. And it's the mitzvah, it's what it's about. But don't go for the political apology. Right? The political apology is very deceptive. The mitzvah is tough to do, but it's very condensed, and if you concentrate on it, it can help you cut through everything else to what's really important. So I wish you a good season of tshuva as we go into Selihot, and